At my 24th birthday dinner, my grandfather asked about my apartment. When I said I didn't know what he meant, my sister smirked and said, "Well, it's not like you were using it anyway." I realized she'd been living there for over a year, and the room went dead silent. The moment those words left Vanessa's mouth, I felt like the entire world had shifted on its axis. My fork clattered against my plate as every conversation in my grandfather's elegant dining room ceased. The crystal chandelier above cast shadows that suddenly seemed darker, more ominous. My parents' faces had gone pale, and I could see my mother's hands trembling as she reached for her wine glass. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just heard. An apartment? Under my name? Released by a trust? I'd been working double shifts at a bookstore just to afford my share of rent in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, while my sister had been living in luxury that was apparently meant for me. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but underneath the shock, something else was awakening. A cold, analytical part of my brain that began cataloging every detail, every advantage, every piece of leverage I suddenly possessed. I looked around the table at my family members, seeing them with new eyes. My parents, who had always portrayed themselves as loving but firm believers in earning your place, had been actively stealing from me. Vanessa, who had flaunted her designer lifestyle while watching me struggle, had been living off what was rightfully mine. Even my younger brother Max was shifting uncomfortably, suggesting he knew more than he'd let on. This wasn't just family favoritism. This was systematic fraud. But the most important realization was that my grandfather clearly hadn't known. His confusion, his direct questioning, the way his eyes had narrowed when he realized I wasn't living in the apartment. He was on my side. For the first time in years, I had an ally with real power. As I sat there processing the magnitude of their deception, I began to understand that this moment wasn't just about discovering their lies. It was about seizing control of a situation where I held all the cards, even if they didn't realize it yet. What my family didn't understand was that I wasn't the naive, struggling college graduate they thought I was. Over the past 3 years, I had been quietly building expertise and connections that positioned me perfectly for this exact moment. While working at the bookstore, I had also been completing my MBA in business administration part-time at Northwestern, specializing in family wealth management and trust law. My thesis had focused specifically on trust fund administration and the legal remedies available when trustees breach their fiduciary duties. My academic work wasn't just theoretical. I had interned with Peterson and Associates, a firm specializing in estate litigation, where I had seen cases exactly like mine. I knew the legal frameworks, the documentation requirements, and most importantly, the severe penalties for trustees who misappropriate trust assets. During my internship, I had worked on a case where parents had diverted their son's trust fund to pay for their daughter's medical school. The lawsuit resulted in a $2 million judgment, including punitive damages and attorney fees. Financially, I was in a much stronger position than my family realized. Despite their attempts to keep me struggling, I had saved $47,000 through careful budgeting and strategic choices. More importantly, I had maintained detailed financial records for years, documenting every expense, every hardship, every sacrifice I'd made, while my sister lived in luxury. These records would be crucial evidence in any legal proceeding, showing the direct harm caused by their deception. My professional network extended far beyond what they knew. Through my MBA program, I had built relationships with trust attorneys, forensic accountants, and estate planning specialists. My professor, Dr. Helena Blackwood, was a former federal prosecutor who had become a leading expert on fiduciary fraud. She had already offered to connect me with attorneys if I ever needed help with family financial matters. She'd somehow sensed the dysfunction during our conversations about trust law. But my most significant advantage was documentation. Unlike most family disputes that came down to he said, she said, I had maintained meticulous records of everything. I had saved every text message where my parents claimed they couldn't afford to help me, every social media post where Vanessa flaunted her lifestyle, every email about family financial decisions where I was excluded. I even had recorded phone calls from last year where my mother explicitly said I should be grateful for what you have, while denying any knowledge of additional family resources. The strategic position I occupied was overwhelming. First, I had legal expertise that neither my parents nor Vanessa possessed. Second, I had detailed documentation proving their deception and the harm it caused. Third, I had my grandfather's obvious support and his clear intent regarding the trust distribution. Fourth, I had professional relationships with experts who could help me navigate complex legal proceedings. Fifth, I had the moral authority that comes from being the wronged party, while they had to defend deliberate deception and theft. My grandfather's voice cut through my strategic analysis. "Adrian, I need to understand exactly what's been happening here." His tone carried decades of authority from building a real estate empire, and I could see my parents shrinking under his gaze. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for through years of legal study and careful documentation. I took a deep breath and began implementing my response strategy. This wasn't about emotional confrontation. It was about systematic exposure of their fraud and positioning myself for maximum advantage. "Grandfather, I think we need to have a very detailed conversation about trust administration and fiduciary responsibilities. I've been studying these issues extensively, and what I'm hearing suggests serious legal violations." The way my father's face went ashen at the phrase "legal violations" told me everything I needed to know. They understood the implications even if they didn't know the specific laws they'd broken. My mother started to speak, but my grandfather held up his hand. "Let Adrian finish." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app I'd learned to use during my internship. "Given the serious nature of what's being discussed, I think we should document this conversation properly. Grandfather, would you mind stating for the record what trust arrangements you made for your grandchildren and when they were supposed to be distributed?" The room fell silent as everyone realized I wasn't the helpless victim they'd expected. I was approaching this like the legal proceeding it was about to become. My systematic preparation was evident in every question, every request for documentation, every strategic pause that let their discomfort build. Over the following week, I implemented a comprehensive strategy that leveraged every advantage I'd identified. My first call was to Dr. Blackwood, who immediately connected me with Marcus Steinberg, a partner at Whitman & Associates specializing in trust litigation. Marcus had handled over 200 cases involving family trust disputes and had never lost a case where the documentation was as comprehensive as mine. "Adrian, what you're describing is textbook breach of fiduciary duty with aggravating factors," Marcus explained during our initial consultation. "The trustees, your parents, have a legal obligation to distribute trust assets according to the grantor's intent. By diverting your apartment to your sister, they've committed what amounts to theft. The documented patterns of deception and the financial harm you've suffered make this a strong case for both actual and punitive damages." Marcus outlined our strategic approach. First, we would demand immediate access to all trust documents and financial records. Second, we would require a forensic accounting of all trust assets and distributions. Third, we would document the full scope of financial harm I'd suffered through their deception. Fourth, we would present my parents with a formal demand for complete restitution, including the apartment, backdated distributions, and compensation for damages. My second consultation was with Jennifer Hayes, a forensic accountant recommended by Dr. Blackwood. Jennifer specialized in family wealth disputes and had developed methodologies for calculating damages in trust misappropriation cases. "Based on what you're telling me, we're looking at several categories of damages," she explained. "Direct financial harm from paying rent instead of living in your apartment, opportunity costs from the delayed trust distributions, and consequential damages from the educational and career constraints their deception imposed." Jennifer's preliminary calculation was staggering. The apartment's rental value over 18 months was $54,000. The investment returns I'd missed from delayed trust distributions totaled approximately $31,000. The additional living expenses, transportation costs, and foregone opportunities totaled another $23,000. Before considering punitive damages, their deception had cost me over $108,000. My third strategic consultation was with Dr. Blackwood herself, who helped me understand the broader implications. "Adrian, this isn't just about money," she explained. "This is about family power dynamics and establishing boundaries. Your parents' behavior suggests they see you as someone they can manipulate indefinitely. The legal process will establish that you're not just their child, you're an adult with rights they cannot violate. The documentation phase was methodical and comprehensive. I compiled 3 years of financial records showing my struggle to pay basic living expenses. I gathered social media evidence of Vanessa's luxury lifestyle, including trips, restaurants, and purchases that would have been impossible on her actual income. I collected communications where my parents denied having resources to help me while simultaneously funding Vanessa's lifestyle. Most importantly, I documented the pattern of deception itself. Email threads where they discussed family financial planning but excluded me. Text messages where they claimed ignorance about trust distributions while clearly knowing the details. Phone calls where they deflected my questions about family resources while having access to detailed trust information. The timing of my response was carefully calculated. I knew my parents would try to control the narrative and minimize the situation. By moving quickly with professional legal representation, I could prevent them from hiding assets or manufacturing justifications. Marcus advised filing formal legal notices within 10 days of discovery to preserve all our claims and prevent any tampering with evidence. My resource mobilization was systematic and overwhelming. Within 5 days of that dinner, I had retained legal counsel, engaged a forensic accountant, and begun formal discovery proceedings. I had documented every aspect of their deception and calculated precise damages. Most importantly, I had my grandfather's complete support and his commitment to ensuring the trust was administered according to his original intent. The strategic beauty of my position was that every day they delayed returning my assets, the damages increased. Every day they spent trying to justify their actions was another day of documented obstruction. Every attempt they made to minimize or rationalize their behavior was more evidence of their systematic deception. Within 72 hours of our family dinner, the consequences began escalating exactly as I had strategically planned. Marcus sent formal legal notices to my parents demanding immediate cessation of all trust violations, complete financial disclosure, and restitution of all misappropriated assets. The legal language was deliberately intimidating. Breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust property, systematic misappropriation, and potential criminal liability. My parents' initial response revealed their complete lack of preparation for organized resistance. My father called me directly, his voice showing panic I'd never heard before. "Adrian, you're blowing this out of proportion. We can work this out as a family." When I calmly explained that I was no longer discussing family matters, but legal violations that required professional resolution, the silence stretched for nearly a minute. My mother's approach was more manipulative, appealing to guilt and family loyalty. "Adrian, how can you do this to us? We've always loved you equally. Maybe we made some mistakes, but families forgive each other." I responded by referencing specific legal precedents from my research. "Mom, in Henderson versus Henderson, the court found that claiming family love while systematically defrauding a beneficiary actually constituted aggravated breach of fiduciary duty." Vanessa's reaction was even more revealing. She sent angry text messages demanding that I stop being dramatic and claiming she'd earned the apartment through her career success. Each message was screenshot and forwarded to Marcus as evidence of her knowledge and complicity in the deception. Her attempts to justify her behavior were actually strengthening our case by documenting her awareness that the apartment wasn't rightfully hers. The forensic accounting phase produced devastating evidence of systematic financial manipulation. Jennifer's detailed analysis revealed that my parents had not only diverted my apartment, but had been systematically using trust funds intended for me to support Vanessa's lifestyle. The luxury trips, designer purchases, and expensive restaurants were all funded through trust distributions that should have been divided equally among grandchildren. More damaging was the discovery of documented communications between my parents discussing their strategy for keeping me financially dependent. Email exchanges showed they believed maintaining my financial struggles would prevent me from challenging their decisions or developing independence. They had specifically chosen not to inform me about trust distributions because they wanted to maintain control over family dynamics. The legal momentum was building systematically. Marcus filed formal discovery motions requiring production of all trust documents, bank records, and communications related to trust administration. My parents' attorney, a general practice lawyer, clearly out of his depth in complex trust litigation, attempted to characterize the dispute as a family misunderstanding that could be resolved through mediation. Marcus's response was professionally devastating. This is not a family misunderstanding. This is documented breach of fiduciary duty involving systematic misappropriation of trust assets over an 18-month period. The evidence shows deliberate deception, conversion of property, and ongoing fraud. Our client is entitled to complete restitution plus punitive damages for the defendant's egregious conduct. My grandfather's support proved decisive in accelerating the resolution. When my parents attempted to claim they had his permission for their decisions, he provided a sworn affidavit stating his clear intent for equal treatment of all grandchildren and his complete ignorance of their diversions of my assets. His statement concluded, "The defendant's actions directly contradict my express instructions and constitute a betrayal of the trust I placed in them as administrators." The financial pressure on my parents was mounting rapidly. Their attorney's fees for defending a complex trust litigation case were projected to exceed $50,000. The potential damages from Marcus's calculations now approached $180,000, including punitive awards. Most significantly, my grandfather made it clear that continued resistance would result in their complete exclusion from any future family financial considerations. Vanessa's position became increasingly desperate as she realized the apartment she'd considered. Hers would have to be vacated immediately. Her attempts to negotiate a gradual transition were rejected when Marcus demonstrated that every day she continued occupying my property constituted additional conversion damages. The rental value calculations meant her delayed departure was costing her approximately $150 per day in additional liability. The resolution phase demonstrated the complete effectiveness of systematic strategic preparation over emotional reaction. Within 3 weeks of that family dinner, my parents agreed to complete restitution, including immediate transfer of the apartment, full accounting of all trust assets, and payment of $87,000 in documented damages and attorney fees. Vanessa was required to vacate the apartment within 48 hours and reimburse the trust for 18 months of rental value totaling $54,000. Her attempts to claim ignorance were contradicted by her own social media posts and text messages documenting her knowledge that the arrangement was temporary and inappropriate. Most significantly, my grandfather restructured the entire trust administration to prevent future violations. My parents were removed as trustees and replaced with a professional trust company with fiduciary insurance and regulatory oversight. All future distributions would be made directly to beneficiaries according to predetermined schedules, eliminating any opportunity for manipulation or favoritism. 6 months after that dinner, my transformation from struggling bookstore employee to independent adult was complete and comprehensive. I was living in the downtown apartment that had always been rightfully mine, furnished according to my own taste and financial capacity. The trust distributions I'd missed were deposited with backdated investment returns totaling $73,000. Combined with my existing savings, I had sufficient resources to complete my MBA without working additional jobs and to begin planning my own career trajectory. My parents faced ongoing consequences that extended far beyond financial restitution, with their reputation within our extended family permanently damaged by the legal proceedings and my grandfather's public statements about their breach of trust. Vanessa's lifestyle underwent dramatic adjustment as she discovered that much of her perceived success had depended on diverted resources that were no longer available, while Max eventually reached out to apologize for his silence and began building an independent relationship with me, separate from our parents' influence. My grandfather's satisfaction with the resolution was evident in his increased involvement in my educational and career planning, and most importantly, I had learned that systematic documentation, professional consultation, and methodical response could overcome even deeply entrenched patterns of manipulation and deception.